All right. I think we have, oh, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So welcome everyone. My name is Debbie Holloway and I work for the James Beard Foundation. And to help navigate the challenges of COVID-19, the James Beard Foundation has been hosting webinars just like this every week to help provide resources for the hospitality and to better stay connected through these difficult times. So some quick housekeeping before we start. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send out a link to the recording after the program wraps. We'll save questions for the end of each section. Please write in your questions anytime using the webinar toolbar. We'll probably actually just try to answer a couple of them at the end, but you can submit a question at any time during the webinar. And if you're having any technical issues, please just message us using the webinar toolbar and we'll do what we can to troubleshoot. So today is a really exciting panel. We're discussing lessons from Indigenous food models in a time of pandemic, a panel hosted and developed by Romero-Briones from First Nations Development Institute. So, hi A-dae, thank you so much for joining us. A-dae is Director of Programs for Native Food and Agricultural Programs for the First Nations Development Institute. She's a Fulbright Scholar, a White House Champion of Change in Agriculture as recognized by President Obama, and a founder and board member of several initiatives and institutes, such as the Aspen Institute's Rural Development Initiative. She has her Juris Doctorate from Arizona State University's College of Law and LLM in Food and Agricultural Law from the University of Arkansas. Thank you so much for being with us today. She is joined today by Valerie Siegrist and Petra Harmon and a little bit about those ladies, although they will introduce themselves a little more fully later. Valerie is an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, serves as the Native American Agricultural Fund's Regional Director for Native Food and Knowledge Systems. She has a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition and Health Sciences from, is it Baxter University? Awesome. And a Master of Arts in Environment and Community. She has co-authored several publications, including the books Feeding the People, Feeding the Spirit, and Feeding Seven Generations. And then Petra is Director of the Senior Feeding Program for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. She has a Master's in Public Health from North Dakota State University, is a licensed Lakota language elementary teacher, and is a member of the North Dakota State University Student Affairs Committee, among many other things. So, A-dae, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you. I am so honored to be here with you today. I'm really excited because Petra and Valerie are probably two of my most favorite people, not only because they work in food, but I think the ideas that are surfacing in the pandemic is all about family, is all about community, it's all about traditional lessons, and navigating modern institutions. And I think Valerie and Petra both embody all of those concepts, and they're just really cool people. And so I'm really excited today. We do have a few questions that we've already developed, but the idea behind this webinar is that we would have a conversation about what's going on in Indian country during the pandemic, what we see in our own communities, but more importantly, how our people are responding based on the idea that we've been through pandemics, we've been through great times of difficulty, and a lot of who we are and the institutions that have been built have been in response to those historical pandemics, but it's also the base for which we are using to respond to our current one. And Val, I consider her a longtime friend, known her for many years. I think Petra the same, and I will pass it to them so they can do their own introductions and make some opening remarks. So Val.
Hello. Thank you for having me and for your sweet words. It's so good to see your face too. I feel like it's been forever since I've seen everybody. Um, my name is Valerie Siegrist. I'm a member of the Muckleshoot tribe. And when I went to school for nutrition, and was coming out of my degree program, I kind of knew that I wanted to come back to serve my community, but knew that I couldn't be the kind of nutritionist that sat behind a desk and told people to eat a certain diet that they didn't have access to. And so I chose to work in the field of community nutrition and clinical herbal medicine, and really focusing on revitalizing those teachings and accessibilities in my own community, but have also worked with so many other tribes, every tribe in the state of Washington, and then so many across the country, learning along the way and being so inspired by everybody's work towards this, renaissance basically of our food and medicine traditions. And recently took a position with the Native American Agriculture Fund, which is a charitable spend down trust that focuses on supporting Native farmers, ranchers, fishers, food producers. And that has been able to really brighten up this whole world of like a food system that is happening right now. All these pivots and all these changes are just emerging. We have an incredible opportunity ahead of us, and everybody on staff takes it really seriously. We're all very passionate about revitalizing the Native food system in a modern world and helping to really expand that and promote sustainability. So I feel really honored to just witness the projects that are happening out there, and also be inspired by Native food champions that are just doing the good work in their communities and standing alongside wonderful people like A-dae. And so anyways, that's my intro and opening words, and I can't wait to share all the inspiring stories with you. As I said to A-dae before we got on here, it's been in a time of so much unknowing, it is my like grounding force and like the remedy that has been keeping me feeling safe and inspired, just knowing that people are out there in the world under immense pressure, making innovation happen still, and having amazing outcomes. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Val. Again, I'm always inspired by your words and your work. Petra, you want to do your introduction and make some opening remarks?
Sure. So I'm very honored and so grateful for the support from A-dae and the First Nations and the work that we're working on here on Standing Rock. And so just a little bit of background information. I have my bachelor's of science in biology from the University of North Dakota, and really have a broad interest. Didn't know if I wanted to go into teaching, high school, if I wanted a master's in environmental science, or if I wanted to go to medical school. And so I have, I come from a family that is really big on water and treaty rights, human rights, and so really was raised with that background. And so really environmental justice is really important to me. And I taught summer school for when I was like 23 years old, and to me, it was really hard and challenging. So I decided to go to medical school instead. And when I went to medical school, I completed 3 years of medical school, and then encountered institutionalized racism. And so that's another area of my interest, is cultural competency and making sure that that's really integrated into our systems, because it is barriers that keep our people from moving forward. And due to that, I didn't finish, and then came home and worked as a teacher, ended up being a high school teacher, and saw the barriers that existed in our educational system. And then went back and got my master's in public health with a concentration of American Indian health. And to me, that master's really brought everything together and really, you know, really helping me to understand and giving me the vocabulary that I needed in order to really help working here at the tribe. So really addressing those social determinants of health. One of the things that I also did when I returned home was one of my goals was to learn my language. And so I became part of the movement for language revitalization. And one of what I became really aware of in regards to education is that if people don't have their basic needs met, then how are they able to learn? And so just like Valerie said, you know, I've had that similar experience too, is that in medical school, we're taught to tell people that if you manage your diet and you exercise, you can control your diabetes and you can prevent your diabetes. And I have my own personal medical issues around diet that require diet. And so when I moved home to the reservation, I saw those barriers, and it was a huge awakening to me that there's something critically wrong when our people can't access those foods. So how can you tell them to manage their diet and eat right? And so you know, going through the Masters in Public Health, really focusing on USDA and the food bill, and realizing that we're living in a food desert. And so really looking at policy, systems, and environment, and how it impacts our personal health and our community health. And so that's the work that I'm doing now. And I really love what I'm doing.
Thank you, Petra, and I'm so honored again to have both of you here today. And I'm just going to start off with a couple questions for you two. I did send these to you ahead of time, but listen closely because I think I'm going to change them a little bit based on what you're saying. And you can please share with us from whatever perspective you feel necessary, whether it be from your community or from your work with tribes across the country. So we are in the midst of COVID, right? This is 2020 COVID. And there has been a lot of press and a lot of conversation about how COVID is affecting Indian country. What do you want folks to know about COVID in Indian country? And what lessons are you learning by being in Indian country at this time? Petra, I'll start with you.
So we're very fortunate that our numbers are low right now, and they're slowly creeping up. But I think that for Standing Rock, one of the lessons, and it even goes back to the DAPO protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, is to remember that we're part of a bigger tribe. And so when we look at Cheyenne River and Pine Ridge and Rosebud, we're all one tribe. And so we have certain reservations who are practicing their sovereignty. And then you know, here on Standing Rock, I don't feel like our leadership is practicing that sovereignty enough, but it is a great lesson to really reflect and say, okay, how sovereign are we really? And what do we need to do to exert mechanisms, policies, and put things in place to protect our people? And so I really think that public health is really a structure that can work in Indian country, because we have that kind of thinking. We have that collective thinking already. So.
Val?
I think wouldn't unmute. I think you're right, Petra, and also that the history of pandemics in our communities is not lasted for hundreds of years. In the Northwest, it started about in the 1770s, and for about 100 years, a wave of pandemics, influenza, smallpox, tuberculosis, came through and wiped out up to 80 to 90% of our population. And that meant like an entire longhouse would be totally wiped out in a matter of days. So, and then burned down. And that is just like if we were to light all the libraries in your county on fire, and that loss of knowledge would have been gone, or the World Wide Web stopped working in 10 minutes. we wouldn't have access to a lot of information. So for us, I feel like it's a memory that's stored in our DNA, and that's not just our story, that's globally has happened. So we keep reminding our community of that here in Muckleshoot, just saying, you know, this could be 4 months is tough, but it could have been like 100 years, and we're being told that we have another year left before we get out of this, or potentially 2. So that's good news. But looking at what our ancestors, you know, I always ask myself, what would my ancestors do? What would they think about this time and where we're at? And one of the things that always seems to happen with that follows a pandemic is that our traditional foods and medical systems take a hit as well. And it could be by vilifying a certain thing or making people feel more fear around it. And that's actually not, a little bit of that was happening at the very beginning, where people were, you know, scared to use certain medicines. They didn't know. Everyone was saying, don't drink elderberry syrup because that could cause more inflammation in your body, which is a really poorly cited research study. But also to remember that we live in a time where the federal feeding programs, the federal dietary guidelines are not as high as they should be as far as vitamins and minerals, the building blocks of our immune system. And so, and that's not just Indian country. We are, of course, at more risk, but a lot of these NHANES studies that have come out of Oregon State University, for example, are showing that most Americans are malnourished. And so at a time when we need to be building up our immune system, we must turn to our local foods that are more vital. And I think that that's what COVID, like the sort of silver lining of it, is that it has illuminated the need to know your local food system more. And so people who are just sort of on the cusp of being interested in getting involved in this traditional foods stuff and local food stuff are now fully on board. They're growing gardens, they're trying to access more salmon. In our community, I'm getting asked tons of questions about how to utilize traditional plants to keep your house clean and things like that. So I think that we know the history of pandemics is just right, you know, really close to our hearts, and can be this stress-inducing situation, and it can also be a time to reflect on what the importance is of taking care of ourselves, learning self-care, slowing down, those home teachings, you know, being more, I mean, I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old that are with me all the time now, and I love them very much and they're a lot of fun. But it's been just an opportunity to spend more time with them, diving deeper into things, looking at the curriculum that is outdoors, and making sure that they're getting that important education as well. And I think that that's what, you know, our ancestors, how they would have wanted us to respond to this, and to also make sure that we're protecting those systems, so that they don't, you know, see more questioning or disruption, I guess. Like, this is an opportunity to strengthen the whole thing.
Beautifully said. And I'm just going to dive into some of the comments that you two made. So when we were talking, let's delve into that history a little bit. When you think about the historical pandemics that have hit your own community, what are they, and how does knowing that your people survived that pandemic influence your current work responding to COVID? Either one can go.
So you know, when you look at different historical accounts that are written, or, you know, Facebook is big in our community, so people will post stories. And you know, what the last pandemic that came through that I think of that was most recent is TB, that really impacted our tribe. And a lot of times, even when the smallpox came out, our tribe was not affected because as much because they stayed away from the fur traders. They figured out to isolate themselves. So the importance of isolation, keeping away from those who are sick or who aren't following protocol. And so I also think of the different practices we have that still continue. For example, when a loved one passes away, the old tradition used to be that all those items from that person's lodge would be given away, and that changed over time to where now you burn everything. You burn you burn all that person's belongings, and you no longer give them away. And so there's a it's almost become a taboo to take personal items from somebody who has passed away, when that was not the earlier tradition. And so I often wondered if that came because of the pandemics that came through. And then I also think about the different ceremonies that we have. And for me, when I get frustrated personally, like I think of how I like to go to movies. And so I always think I miss going to the theater. But this is a time when what I told another lady was, you look at all of our ceremony protocols, they tell us things to what to do. And if we follow all of them from our ceremonies, it's really a guide on how to get through this pandemic. And so one of them is when we keep it's called keeping of the spirit. And if you lost a loved one and you weren't ready to let them go, you would keep their spirit for a whole year. And that meant that you were responsible for feeding that spirit, talking to them and taking care of them. But it also meant that you stopped going out in public, and you stopped doing things in public, and you really limited your contact with other people. And so really, I just feel like if we followed our ceremonial protocols, that's our guide to get through these pandemics.
Wow, very powerful. Val?
Yeah, I agree. That's almost exactly what I was going to say, is to look at our protocols, which, and sometimes it can be difficult. My husband is on tribal council, and so I'm watching him make these really tough decisions around things like, not being able to hold funerals or church gatherings, and really struggling with, is this the right decision to make, because our people need that time to grieve, but it's so risky at this point. We're being told, that the funeral homes we work with could lose their licenses if they allow us to even do drive-bys. It's been really difficult. And so right now there just seems to be this sort of, kind of open, it's almost like an open wound that is trying to be healed, and it's going to take a long time to do it. And I think about what we know of droplet infections and how highly contagious they are, and how our bodies responded, and for our ancestors to, without like vaccines or inoculations or anything at that time, to have created antibodies and immunities to that. And then the fact that we're even still here, it's such a miracle. And then to also, like, in the wave of all that, coming out of those pandemics in the 1800s, really getting together, putting their minds together, and writing some of the most powerful environmental legislation of these lands still, some of the things that came out of the treaties in the Northwest, to me just is a testament to how resilient our culture is. And so, and like our elders always, remind us that the culture is the medicine, and to always be looking to it for answers. So the protocols, yes, Petra, are like, that's so inspiring to me to hear. And so much of what you're saying was happening at Standing Rock, or is happening at Standing Rock, is the same, values, very similar to what we do here in the Northwest as well. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. Yeah.
Well, you ladies touched on something very important, which is like cultural protocols. And I guess cultural behavior is so important to get us through these times. But let's talk a little bit about what we see currently. and that is there has been, not only have we been through pandemics, but we've been through all this really tough legislation historically that has weakened our ability to have protocols or even have culture. Do you see those influences in the community response to COVID today? I'm going to start with you, Petra.
So I definitely see it, and I want to bring up a presentation that was provided to us by Dr. Michael Yellowbird during my master's program. And he does this presentation on the policy of assimilation and how assimilation has been forced upon us for the last couple of centuries. And it still really is treated as the answer to the Indian problem. And so, you know, you've probably heard it. I know I've heard it in my lifetime, is this, you know, if I complain about the reservation, a non-Indian's response will be, well, why don't you just leave? And so when they're saying, why don't you just leave? They're saying, assimilate into our society and all your problems will go away. And so when you think about the process of assimilation and the boarding schools and how it's still really pushed upon us in our educational system, and we've all gone through that, that really impacts our sovereignty and our thinking, so that our own people and our own leadership think that our ways are primitive and they don't want to go back to those ways, and they don't trust our culture, they don't trust that our people have the solutions. And so really then you're battling that out on the leadership, in the leadership circle, because the state or the feds should have the answers, not wanting to rely on our traditional practices to get us through this pandemic. And to me, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna exit the circle and go down this path, because we just do not have time to hash that out. We do not have time to heal and deal with the whole process of assimilation. We just need to deal with this pandemic. So I'm definitely seeing it, and I think that presentation really helped me to see and to prepare myself for what I was going to deal with when I came back to my tribe, work for my tribe.
Val?
Yeah, but prior to working with the Native Ag Fund, I worked for my tribe as the director of curriculum and instruction. And my major goal was to make sure that we worked with our tribal school youth to do more outdoor education. And that's through developing these food-themed cross-discipline, interdisciplinary units. And, you know, I feel really lucky that I had administration and leadership that supported it and really wanted to see that happen, more of our youth active on the landscape. But I also felt like what we were doing was working so well, and in order to really do a good job of teaching history and culture for our state and our public common schools, that it was just an impossible system to get people to do more outdoor education, which is kind of ironic because it seems to be the answer right now, you know, as we're trying to think about going back into school this fall. But the numbers that we were seeing by just we would say that the first form of literacy for our people was learning to read the landscape. You know, at a young age, there was no age segregation. There were no 4 walls and a whiteboard and a chalkboard to teach from. The curriculum was the land. It is the land. And that when we get people out there in the environment, breathing the air, learning how to create and identify questions and innovate and experience natural phenomena and try to find questions to that we in turn are helping to create good critical thinkers, people who feel confident in science education and technology and engineering and math. All those things are all outside, all in outdoor education. And I feel like that was not my experience going to school. When I studied at Bastyr, it was painful. I love natural medicine. I loved everything I learned, but the labs were my time, not studying and memorizing a textbook and taking a test. I just don't feel like that's actually telling of whether or not somebody understands the material. But experiential learning, taking it all in, hands-on work, that is so, there are parts of that that help create so many more connections in the brain that support mental health and the ability to be resilient. And so, you know, overcoming those invisible barriers, and sometimes they're not invisible, sometimes they're very visible, sometimes legislation makes sure of that, but overcoming those and just sort of unknitting them and putting things back together, we see great results in our community. And that is, that's the work that we have. That's the opportunity that we have too with working, you know, with food programs, is that they're amazing organizing tools. They're incredible, not just resources, but we see them as our relatives and greatest teachers. And so how do we lean into that and really help empower people through revitalizing our food systems and knowledge systems?
Thank you. Well, that was my next question, is like, you both you ladies to me represent like the future of food, if you will, in Indian country, because you're combining very important lessons and concepts about Indigenous thinking into food, modern food systems that have to deal with things like curriculum and dealing with funding from federal agencies. So how do you see the Indian country response to COVID with food systems playing out? What are some of the positives that you can share with our audience about the work you're seeing in Indian country currently, or in your own program? Val, I'm going to start with you.
So I get the really cool opportunity to connect with, well, I have about 12 projects that I get to watch and stay in contact with. And they are, I think of Megan Baldy from Klamath Trinity River Conservation District. And she works with the Hoopa tribe, her tribe, and she is a master food preservationist, which I didn't know that certificate existed, and now I want to get it, but apparently UC Sacramento does it. And so, or UC Davis, I think is what it's called. So she had a project with us to do workshops to teach Hoopa families how to do preservation in their homes. And then shelter in place happened. And she called me up within a couple of hours and said, I'm going to pivot and put everything on Facebook Live and see what happens. Do you mind? And we were told, do whatever it takes to help stay on mission, you know? So she did it and got like thousands of people watching. She was able to create a spreadsheet online where Hoopa families could go in and sign up, and they would just sign off that they'd taken a couple of classes, and then she would deliver their home canning supplies to their door, sanitized. And her whole thing is, you know, what better time than now to learn how to do this thing. And so it's been really just an honor watching her do this work, and she's just so good at what she does. She's amazing. And then Flower Hill Institute, it has an incredible program where they were able to allocate seeds and create a milpa seed mix, which is also called, I guess, like a chaos garden. And it's a indigenous method of creating basically food blankets on the ground. So this mix has like over 50 different varieties of seed and humate in there, and you just cast this on a raised bed, and it grows cucumbers, squash, peas, beans, and they sent those out to over 200 different tribes in a matter of 3 weeks. People were just like ready to respond right away, and all that they asked is for them to send just an image of the food growing and a little synopsis of what they did to give it back to the community. So that's incredible. Utah Dene Bakea, Cynthia Wilson, and Gavin Noyes are doing amazing work down there responding to some of the Navajo chapters. And you know, I'm telling you all this because they are doing this work represented as one of the, in a day you could probably go on and on and on about this, but so little funding comes to Indian country to do this work. And in the light of COVID and this whole pandemic, that number has gotten even more reduced. Yet we're making these incredible things happen with a very little bit. So to me, it's like we're very innovative. We have, you know, access to people who have the pulse on exactly what it is their community needs. And investing in Indian country, investing in these food champions is not a risk. It is a incredible return that you'll be getting. And it's just, you know, there's so many lessons that could be gleaned from how people are really handling this, given the lack of infrastructure that many of them need. We have an issue here in the Northwest where Eastern Washington farmers have something to the tune of like 20,000 pounds of potatoes coming our way every week, and the tribes who need those foods don't have the infrastructure to store them and get them distributed properly. And so now this whole conversation is starting around regionalizing food systems and developing these hubs and sub-hubs that can help really support those, you know, this type of response, but also federal feeding programs, local feeding programs, increasing the or decreasing, I guess, the risk it is to get into the food system game if you wanted to become a farmer, a rancher, a fisher, a food producer. So I think it just, as Native people, we know that when there's a challenge put in front of us, we always rise to the occasion. And that no matter what, you know, I think about the teachings of the plant people, and we think about dandelion as being the like ultimate resilient plant. I heard an elder from Alaska tell me once that you have to be like the dandelion, because no matter what anybody tries to do to you, you will never go away. Like, you can try to spray poison on me, you can try to rip me out of the ground, but you will always return and be big medicine for the people. And so those are the kinds of, that's the kind of way in which, you know, we carry our work, and it's inspiring and really fun to watch. And I don't mean to make it seem like, you know, everything's cool, all is good. We need to be included in emergency response efforts. Absolutely. We need to be at the table when we're talking about developing food codes or policies or legislation. And, you know, Indian country deserves a fair chance at being funded just like everybody else is. That's it.
Thank you, Val. The dandelion, I'm going to remember that. Petra?
So I just want to continue on what Valerie had to say, because that is, you know, the biggest challenge we have is infrastructure in every sense of the word, and then not having enough funding. So we have rich resources in regards to human capital, and having that collective knowledge of hunting, fishing, gathering food preservation, all of those things. And so under my program, I'm basically the Indian version of Meals on Wheels. And one of the things about Meals on Wheels is you're required by the feds to provide ethnic foods for the groups that you serve, and that's across the country. And so in Indian country, where do we buy our traditional foods then? So there are allowances in regards to using federal funding to pay people to do subsistence hunting and prepare all of that food. And so it's really tough because our people don't necessarily have the basics in regards to the finance system. And so no bank accounts, they're really cash based yet. And so this year, to me, so yesterday I had a temporary employee start, and she's my outreach coordinator. So she will be the contact person for outside sources who want to donate or how can they help. So she'll be leveraging resources for me. And I'm fortunate that we get a lot of people coming through the door and asking how can they help. And I just need them, you know, I can direct them on how fast can, you know, for me, it's how fast can we get the resources out to the people. So that doesn't mean cutting me a check. That means going to the grocery store themselves and setting up an account to buy the food and then figuring out how they're going to get it delivered out to the people. So I'll go to the grocery store and say, this person is coming, they need to set up an account. They'll be sending you a check, or giving them access to my account so that they can order $10,000 worth of food off of the Cisco truck for our people, and then it's shipped to my site. So because once it comes, if they were to cut me a check and it has to go into our finance system, now there's all these barriers that are set up in order for me to access those resources again. And so really, how do I avoid that democracy to get those resources out to the people is really a challenge. And so we had a personal donor who donated $1,000 worth of gift cards. And so we put the advertisement out there of anyone who has, you know, dug the wild turnips, the timsila, we're buying braids, bring them on by, you'll get a $50 gift card. So really trying to figure out how to support those families who are so rich in our culture and traditions and who have preserved those ways for us. How can we best support them? And I'm really grateful because First Nations is really supporting us in trying to get a system put together for them so that we can lift them and make sure that they pass on that collective knowledge to the younger generation. And so with my outreach coordinator, I'm really glad she's on board. She's really excited, and we both know that there are people all over who want to help us. We just need to make sure that the door is open to them and that we've created the system so that they're able to donate and get the resources out to the community without them going through the bureaucracy.
That is a lot to consider. I mean, I think both of you mentioned some very, very bureaucratic barriers. That's not even the right, I mean, that's just like naming them. But there are some systems in place that make it very, very hard for tribes to react in like a culturally appropriate way, because we've had to deal with all these different layers of institutions that may not be ours, but that's where we are. And so we're coming to the end of the webinar. I just have 2 more questions for you. The last one will be really fun. But what do you want people to know about Indian country currently? Like right now, we see a lot of negative press, right? Like Indian country has some of the highest rates because of pre-existing health conditions. But we know we're very strong people. We come from beautiful people. What do you think people need to know after they read a news story or after they read something negative, like what do you really want to follow up with? And what do you want people to remember about Indian country? Petra, I'm going to go with you.
I was actually thinking about that this morning. Was thank God for all the grassroots people and the families who just pick up and do what needs to be done, and they don't wait for tribal council, they don't wait for donors. They leverage every resource, whether it's other families. They just know what to do, and they organize and they do it. And that's what we're seeing in our communities. It's those people and those families who are moving and addressing things as fast as they can. And then the other thing is our greatest tool, our greatest coping mechanism that we have is laughter. And so being able to laugh and help each other during this time is just really been beneficial. And so I wrote it on my Facebook. We're often, we call ourselves the Ocheti Shakowi. We're the 7 campfires of the Lakota Dakota people. And I was saying, as this pandemic goes on, we're transforming into the Ocheti Shaganoha, which is the 8 campfires, and the 8th campfire will be called the Nure Wanichapi. It's those who have no ears. So those who don't want to listen during this pandemic will form our 8th campfire. And so, of course, the traditional people got it and thought it was funny. So just remember to keep laughing. So
Val?
So true. I love that humor is everywhere around us. I think it really is what saves us all the time. I think that the media can sometimes portray us as that we're troubled, or we've got a lot of issues or poor health outcomes, but also know that tribes are incredible economic engines and partners for the municipalities that they are in. For Muckleshoot, we're the second largest employer of South King County, which is one of the most densely populated counties in the country. And so when we had to shut down our casino, it was a really big decision, not just for our people, but for our local economy. And that we contribute in so many ways that are unseen and not often. We're really bad about, we're humble, okay? So we're really bad about bragging about all the things that we do. And it drives me crazy because we, just 2 tribes in the state of Washington put in more towards salmon habitat recovery than the entire state does. And yet for decades, our fishermen will sit back on the beach to allow those fish to go back up and spawn, allowing commercial industry and everybody else to harvest off of them. And I think that happens because they know that we know that if the salmon cease to exist, then so do we as a people. That we may still be here and move and breathe on this land, but that we're nobody unless those foods we've organized our lives around for thousands of years or since time immemorial exists. So for us, that to me is an indicator of how generous of a people that we are. And that is a cultural teaching too, that you're judged by your generosity. And so, if you come to our home, we'll make sure that you're fed, we'll make sure that you leave feeling in a good way, that that those are, parts of our communities that aren't often talked about. How, yes, we're funny and we're humble and we're generous, and that we're also incredible partners and allies in your local systems. And so, come to us with a partnership. And like my sweet sister, Abby Echohawk, always says, don't come to us out of pity, come to us because we have answers and can meet you at the table.
So beautiful. And this is why you are 2 of my most favorite people. I'm always learning something for you. And of course, we're with an audience that is very much interested in food traditions, in culture, in cooking. So my last question to you before we take audience questions is, what is your favorite traditional food meal? I'm going to start with you, Val.
Oh my goodness. Well, because it is our Chinook salmon season, the springers are coming back, I'd have to say fire roasted salmon is, of course, my favorite. It's like fatty and we use alder wood in my household. That's how we do it. And it's butterfly back over the fire, roasted really slow and low. And so all the good fats come out, and it's that first salmon of the season. So it's just so good. And really salt and pepper, nothing else. So I've been spoiled because I live with Louis, my partner, is a fisherman. He's out fishing actually right now, just off the bay in Seattle. And he is also the fish cook for the tribe. And so I get the perfect flavor and now cannot eat anything that's like marinated salmon or honey glazed salmon or anything like that. Ugh. I used to, but now that I know how it should be cooked, like fire is the best flavor. And of course, like love and fun and freshness. And I feel really spoiled that I get to have fresh caught salmon from my own man. So good.
Thank goodness it's like lunchtime where I am. Petra?
So my favorite food is it's a buffalo stew. It's called washtunkala, and it's buffalo meat or deer meat. Washtunkala is actually the word for dried corn. So it's all of our dried foods, and it's something that our family makes, but we might not be the ones who dried the corn. We might not have been the ones who picked the timsila and dried them, or we might not have made the dried meat, which is called bapa, or we might not have dried the squash. And so really what our family does is we're oftentimes the ones who are the timsila diggers, which has a really short season. And there's so many stories tied into each of those foods, and they link back to our creation stories. And so I just want to mention that language revitalization is so tied into our traditional foods revitalization, and that when I think of washtunkala, it's really a power food, and it's supposed to be made with bones, and that's something that's missing from our communities, is that bone broth. And that's because we're not butchering our own animals and cooking them the way that our ancestors have. And when you make this washtunkala, it's cooked for 12 to 18 hours. And so you're drawing out everything out of those bones. And so our family, we do the drying of the timsila, which is a really short season. And then we are also the makers of washtunkala. And so we have families, we barter our timsila braids, we barter, when people know we're going to make it, they'll bring us the other ingredients, and then we cook it, and then they come and they'll eat it at whatever feeds that we prepare it at. And so our family cooks it in large quantities. And I think the most that we cooked at one time was for 1,000 people over in Minnesota, and it took us all night to cook it. And so that's, to me, is my favorite food, because it's really community driven, and it represents the model for the unspoken, unrecognized food cooperatives that our traditional families have and continue to operate. And it makes me emotional, because it draws, when we make it, it draws the community, and people get excited about that food.
That is so beautiful. And I'm excited not only about your comments, we do have quite a few questions, but we're coming to the top of the hour. So I'm going to just throw out some easy ones that won't take a lot of time, so we can get through some of them. But I think if if you're available, we can figure out how to get some of these questions to you. So can you, one of the question is, Val, can you say the name of the Hoopa woman again and let people know how to find her?
Her name is Megan Baldy, Meagen, from the Klamath Trinity River Conservation District. And they have a website, CTR, hang on, she just, anyways, it's the, it's the acronym, that's the website. If you Google it, it'll come up.
Okay, Megan Baldy from Hoopa. And Hoopa is H-O-O-P-A. And Val, can you say a little more about the food blanket and what was the name that you used of that seed mix?
Milpa, M-I-L-P-A, Milpa mix. I don't know if any of it is still currently in production. That was one of the things, like along with toilet paper and, you know, Lysol wipes, all the seed stock kind of dried up out there. That was kind of really crazy to watch, and also why Flower Hill's pivot on their project was so important, because they had the opportunity to buy up that seed mix. But it has sparked a lot of interest. I hear more and more people talking about it, and every time I mention it, people have questions. They really want it, and I love the idea of pulling together. You know, WSU is now talking about, Washington State University is now talking about pulling together a mix that's like a spring lettuce mix that you could, you know, roll in some humate and toss on the ground. So yeah, Milpa, that's what it's called.
And we're at the top of the hour. There's many more questions, but we're not going to be able to get with them today. Again, thank you. You two are some of the most beautiful food advocates, Indigenous food advocates out there, and thank you so much for spending an hour of your day with us. And good cheer and laughter and smiles to all your work in the future. Debbie?
And thank you, A-dae. It's been so lovely. This is now the second webinar that you've participated in with James Beard, and I'm excited for more with you and with First Nations. So thank you so much for your love and your brain power for these webinars that we've been working on, and for the time of the First Nations Development Institute. JBF has webinars just like these, and across a wide range of topics, usually multiple times a week. So for any of our audience members who really loved this panel and would like to see more, or would maybe like to go back and look at some of the panels that we've done in the last few weeks and months, just go to jamesbeard.org and look at the industry support tab. And we thank you all so much for coming, and especially a huge thank you to our panelists. It was such an honor to have you all here, and can't wait until we all speak again the next time. So thank you, everyone. Everyone have a great rest of your day.